We have order, please. Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the Georgetown Township Zoning Board of Appeals meeting for August 22, 2018. Tonight, the board will be addressing the items identified on the agenda. A copy of tonight's agenda is displayed on the west wall of the hearing room. Public comments on the agenda items will be allowed during the public hearing portion of the meeting. Before asking questions or making comments, you will be requested to come to the podium, state your name and address, and direct all of your comments to the chair. Once the public hearing portion of the meeting has been closed, no further public comment will be accepted. Tonight, Georgetown Township Zoning Administrator Manette Minier is present and is available to the board to address questions about ordinance language, ordinance detail, and ordinance history. Our zoning administrator is going to be introduced so that everyone understands why she might be speaking and offering expert counsel here. Manette, would you mind identifying yourself? Thank you. Also, in a few minutes, Township Attorney Crystal Morgan will be providing everyone with some details about the meeting procedures and the staff report on the specific appeal request identified on the agenda. Our first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the last Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting of March 28, 2018?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Is there a second?
I second.
Is there any discussion? It's been moved and seconded that the board approve the minutes of the meeting of March 28, 2018. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion is carried. The next item of business is the consideration of variance request 1804. Mark and Jennifer Dyke of 2295 Van Buren, Georgetown Township, have applied to allow the keeping of 2 ducks characterized as emotional support animals. The request requires a variance from Section 3.4 of the Georgetown Charter Township Zoning Ordinance, which governs accessory buildings and uses in residential districts, including the keeping and regulation of certain birds, and which currently permits the keeping of chickens but does not include ducks. The subject property is located at 2295 Van Buren, Georgetown Township, Ottawa County, Michigan, is identified as PP number 70-14-27-365-004, and is in a low-density residential zoning district. All right, at this time I'd like to introduce Attorney Crystal Morgan and request that you address the board and those in attendance about the meeting process and the rules for public comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The meeting will proceed with the applicants and or their attorney presenting their application to the board. I anticipate that the attorney and possibly one or both of the property owners may wish to provide comments to the board for your consideration. After the applicant has presented their application to the board, I will present a staff report consistent with the July 30 staff report that you have in your possession. The matter will then proceed to a public hearing. After the public hearing is closed, the applicant will have the option or their attorney to address the board in response to any of the public comments that they've heard. The VBA will then deliberate and during that time has obviously the authority to ask questions of the applicant's attorney, any staff, or myself to have your questions answered. With regard to the public hearing process, consistent with the Open Meetings Act, the ZBA has adopted Policy 2011-01 governing the procedures for the conduct of its meeting. Consistent with these rules, which will be enforced tonight, public comment period, each speaker is limited to public comments of 3 minutes. Each person who wishes to address the board has one opportunity to do so. We have provided a sign-up sheet for those who wish to make a public comment tonight. That's available at the door. And then there is also a sign-in sheet at the podium. This information, name, address is required per the ZBA's rules, only if you intend to speak, make public comment tonight, not simply to attend the meeting. Having that information assists the secretary with preparing the minutes of tonight's meeting. I believe that the chair will have the sign-in sheet, and to assist with the orderly progress of this meeting, given the number of people in attendance, he will proceed to call the names in order on that list. If after everyone has had an opportunity on that list to make their public comment, if there is anyone else in attendance who wishes to make public comment and has not had the opportunity to do so, you will have an opportunity then to come to the podium, provide your name and address, and to make your comments at that time before the public hearing is closed. The public hearing process, public comment period, is not intended to be a question and answer session, so questions posed to the board will not be answered during public comment. That's a standard protocol with public hearings. I would ask, and the board asks, that everyone be courteous and respectful of other speakers, to keep the volume down in the room so that everyone is able to hear all of the comments being made. Per the ZBA's rule policy, public comment period is limited to 20 minutes. However, it will be extended by the zoning board on a motion to extend that 20 minutes to allow everyone who wishes to have an opportunity to speak to make comments. So there may be brief pauses during the public comment period simply for a motion to be made to extend the period beyond that 20 minutes. If the public comment or public hearing goes beyond a reasonable amount of time in the board's determination, it can be postponed to a future date, but we will reserve our comments on that depending on how long the public comment period goes. With that, I believe that we're prepared to hear from the applicant or the applicant's attorney.
Thank you. Who's here to speak on behalf of the applicant?
Maybe one of the first things that we do when a new case comes in the door, and it really doesn't matter what it is, money, property, animals occasionally. One of the first questions we ask is, all right, we're at the starting line, the finish line is winning, how do I get there? Because at the end of the day, that's essentially what the client wants. And there are some exceptions to this, but basically there's three ways to do it. And the first one is fairly obvious, and that's I follow the law, right? So if I have the law on my side, that's good. I'm going to focus on that, and I'm going to ride that horse to the finish line. I'll talk about the particulars of the applicable law here in a minute, but first I kind of want to talk about how we've gotten to where we're at with the issue of emotional support animals and the Fair Housing Act. I'm 34 years old, and that doesn't really matter, but I say that because I'm probably one of the youngest adults in this room, and I can remember in my lifetime when I was in school, kids with autism, kids with cerebral palsy, kids with Downs, kids who didn't learn like everybody else learned, they kind of got marshaled together and they got sent to the special ed room. And there was this broad brush approach to how we dealt with everyone that was different. And it's a little bit shocking that I can remember that happening within the last 20 years. Autism Speaks, which is, I don't know if it's the largest, but it's one of the largest autism research and advocacy organizations in the United States. It was formed 13 years ago. It's barely over a decade old. And in 2000, the number of children that were diagnosed or designated with autism in some form was 1 in 150. In 2014, it was 1 in 50. And it's not because more kids have it, it's because we're learning, right? Like we're evolving. We're figuring out, okay, this is out there, this exists. It comes in all shapes and sizes. And just because what works for one kid doesn't necessarily work for the next. And so we're developing as a society, and the law, it's catching up, and it's slow. It's a slow-moving beast, but it's getting there. It has a ways to go, but one thing is certain, and that's 25 years ago, it didn't protect kids like Dylan. This issue of emotional support animals under the Fair Housing Act was nothing more than a pipe dream. But now it does protect kids like Dylan. And specifically, I'm talking about the Fair Housing Act and this notion of emotional support animals. Now, there are naysayers out there, and you see them all over the place, and they say, well, geez, if you can have an emotional support duck, why can't I have an emotional support tiger or whatever? There are people that are going to take advantage of this law, just like there are people that take advantage of a lot of different laws. But that doesn't necessarily mean that happens in every case. It's certainly not the case here. We're kind of in a strange position. You guys are a local, very capable, but local municipal zoning body. You're asked typically to decide issues where, hey, I'm trying to build a garage. There's a 10-foot setback. I'd like to have it 8 feet from the property line. Things like that, right? That's sort of a run-of-the-mill zoning decision. This is not that, right? This is a little bit different. And in a way, it's a little bit unfair because you're being asked to interpret and understand and enforce and do it correctly provisions of federal law that perhaps you were familiar with, but my guess is not maybe that familiar with before this particular instance. And so it is a little bit strange. It seems like it should be in front of a court, but it's not because it's important that we have humans, the local people making this decision. The good news is that the analysis that you have to engage in, hopefully this evening, is relatively straightforward. Your typical variance application, you have 7 or maybe 8 different factors that you have to go through, and of course the applicant has to meet every one, and then they get a variance. In this situation, you have 2. And the questions you have to answer are, is our request reasonable, and is it necessary? And I'll talk about the issue of necessity first because it's relatively easy to dispose of. That's an issue that's typically for medical providers to determine, is there a need here? And we've submitted documentation from Dr. Dykstra, who's Dylan's psychologist. I also have a letter from Dylan's family doctor, general practitioner, that we didn't provide, I think because we forgot we had it. But it essentially says the same thing. Hey, you know, dogs work for some kids, ducks work for Dylan. These are a medical necessity. And so the issue of necessity is not necessarily where, at least I think.
Can we have a copy of that, please?
Yes. I have stuff.
Thank you. Thank you.
So the issue of necessity is, I don't necessarily think you're free to do whatever you want. I don't necessarily think where the discussion should focus. I believe the discussion should focus on the issue of reasonableness. And reasonableness is tough because that's where the rubber kind of meets the road, because there is no bright line test regarding what's reasonable. What's reasonable in one case could be something completely different compared to what's reasonable in another case. And that's certainly the case when it comes to emotional support animals. So I would offer a few comments on the issue of reasonableness. Now, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but this case has gotten a little bit of media attention. And it's been interesting. My firm and myself have kind of elected to stay behind the camera. This isn't a place for us. It's my client's position to tell their story, and I feel like they've done it fairly well. But I follow these stories, every one. I read, I see the local ones, and then it gets picked up by affiliates, and now it's all over the world. And I think I've read every single one. And so I read it, and then I do something incredibly dangerous, which I go into the comment section. And that's a scary place. Crazy stuff happens in the comment sections of these articles. And you never really know what you're going to see, and it's a lot of uninformed opinions, and it's some that are not. But one thing that struck me, it really stuck with me because it echoed the real-time conversations I was having with other attorneys or friends or family when I would talk to them about this case. And that's this. I would get to the point in the story where I'd tell them that, by the way, these people live on a lake. And it's very simple, but the look of incredulousness you get is like, wait a minute. They got ducks. They live on a lake. There are ducks on the lake. There are geese, whatever. That seems reasonable to me, right? If they lived on a farm and they wanted an emotional support cow, that might be reasonable in that situation. Maybe it wouldn't be in this case, but they don't. They live on a lake. They have ducks. There's ducks on the lake. seems reasonable. And the second issue regarding reasonableness, I would say, is this, and it relates to the issue with the chickens. Georgetown Township at some point passed an ordinance that expressly allowed for the keeping of chickens in the township. I don't know why. My guess is that there was some push because people with this organic food movement like to have farm fresh eggs. City folk want chickens, and so, boom, there's chickens. I'm not going to comment on if it's a good idea or a bad idea. I really don't care, to be honest with you. But the fact of the matter is, the township passed this ordinance. They must have believed it was reasonable, at the very least, because otherwise they wouldn't have passed it. And the ordinance allows for 6 chickens, 6 of them. And they can keep them in a coop that's 8 feet high. And that is fine. You don't need a permit for that. You don't need an application. You don't need anything. That is presumptively reasonable pursuant to the township's ordinances. And so we would submit to you, and I don't say that tongue-in-cheek, we would submit to you that if 6 chickens, and chickens stink, 6 chickens in an 8-foot coop is reasonable, then 2 ducks in an enclosure about like this, 10 by 10, also necessarily has to be reasonable. It should be a lesser included offense, right? I've been to the Dykes home multiple times. I believe each of you have as well. We appreciate that very much. It's very helpful when the board members actually come out so they can get kind of an idea of what these ducks are doing and, more importantly, maybe what they're not doing as far as affecting the subject property and the surrounding areas. So that's it. That's really the consideration under the FHA. Is this a reasonable request? Clearly, we would say it is. I would like to hear the counter argument that it somehow is not. So that's the first way that we get from A to B using the law. The law supports us under the FHA. I set it out in more detail in my application. I'm sure you all found very riveting, and I apologize for that. But at the end of the day, this is permitted, this is allowed, and frankly, it's mandated. So that's the first way the law helps us. The second way the law helps us, frankly, is with your own ordinances. When I first heard that Mark had an issue and it involved these ducks, and the township said, you have ducks, you need to get rid of the ducks. All right. The first thing I did was I looked at the township's animal ordinance, which is Chapter 6. I have it right here. And I honestly expected to see a provision that said you can't have ducks. And I was somewhat surprised to find that is not what's in here. There are prohibited animals. There's 2 main categories. One are dangerous animals. Essentially, that's animals that have a dangerous or ferocious disposition. I think we can probably all agree that doesn't encompass these ducks. And the second is exotic animals. That's kind of what you would expect. Monkeys, snakes, jaguars, leopards, crocodiles, piranhas. They do list sections of birds, gamecocks, and fighting birds and fighting fowl. So presumably the township could have outlawed all birds. They chose not to. They picked these ones. That makes sense. So the ducks aren't listed. So then I thought, well, what's the problem? And then I read the township's enforcement letter, which I have right here, and it does not cite Chapter 6. It cites chapters 8.2 of the township ordinance and 8.3. I know you guys are probably pretty familiar with these because these talk about uses in a low-density residential district. And they say the typical things. You can have a house. You can have a garage. If you want to have a church, you have to have a special use permit. Come through us for that. Fairly straightforward. And the reasoning of the township at the end is having ducks isn't listed here, and all uses not listed are prohibited, so having ducks must be prohibited. And I say with all due respect, that's just simply wrong. Because if that logic were correct, you couldn't have dogs, because dogs aren't listed here. You couldn't have cats, you couldn't have fish, you couldn't have anything like that, because they're not expressly listed in these use paragraphs. And they shouldn't be, because you have an animal ordinance, and your animal ordinance directly addresses the issue at hand. So, frankly, I don't know that any of this is strictly necessary. Now, I think we should do it. I think it's a good idea. I think everybody needs finality. But I don't know that it's necessary because I don't believe the Dykes are actually violating any of your ordinances. And so I'm not sure that they need a variance, and I'm not sure they have to meet that requirement because they're not really in violation, certainly not of your animal ordinance. But anyway, that's the law, right? I said there's 3 ways. That's the first one. Some people might say, myself included, well, that should be the only thing that matters, right? If you went on the law, who cares about anything else? The reality is that's not always the way the world works because decisions are made by humans, judges, juries, local boards, whatever. And you all have, and it's just natural, you're a good person, you have this desire to do the right thing. So the second avenue to get me from A to B is I need good facts, right? I might not have the law. Sometimes the law and the facts, they go in the same direction. It's a beautiful thing. Sometimes the law goes this way, but I have a really compelling case that goes this way. And I'm not going to say much on this, but the fact of the matter is this case has garnered a ton of attention. It's gone worldwide. People are walking on eggshells a little bit. They're not sure what to do. They're a little bit afraid. And it's easy to lose sight of the fact that at the end of the day, this case is about a little boy who wakes up every morning with a difficult hill to climb, and the ducks help him get to the top of the hill. That's the end of it. And I'll leave it to you to decide what's the right thing to do in this case. Obviously, we believe that's fairly obvious. So that's the facts. That's number two. Law, we'll get to there. The facts, we'll get to there. And the third one, this is kind of the Alamo. This is when you really don't have anything else, which occasionally happens, and you can't just give up. Occasionally, convincing the decision maker, you guys in this case, to just take the path of least resistance, that occasionally works. That's the way to get you from A to B. Usually you need something to put with it, either the law or the facts, whatever. But that's one way that you can do it. Mr. Dyke's going to speak here in a minute. He's going to address the particulars, Dylan, the dogs, the keeping of the dogs, the care of the dogs, the specific complaints that have been received, the issues with the homeowners association, things like that. But before he gets up to speak, I want to leave you guys with this. I have an opportunity, because of what I do, to go around the state of Michigan and do all kinds of this kind of work. Not necessarily with animals, sometimes, but not always. Different variance requests, and it's the typical run-of-the-mill stuff, the setbacks, the use variances, and things like that. And it's actually pretty interesting because I get to go to different places and meet different people and see how different local governments work, and that's fairly enjoyable because I'm a giant nerd, and that's enjoyable, right? So one thing I do realize, and I always try to remember to do, is to thank you guys for doing this. Regardless of what you decide, this is a tough job you have, and it's a thankless job, and it doesn't pay very well. And so I really appreciate your willingness to serve on this committee. These are tough decisions that you have to make. I try to say that to every board that I'm in front of, because I don't know how much you hear of it. One thing that I've never said, that I'm about to say to you, and this is the truth, is I actually envy you guys. I envy the position that you're in right now, because you're in a high-profile position, and you get to take the easy way out, and you get to follow the facts, and you get to follow the law, because all three of those things point in the exact same direction, which is, in this circumstance, this kid should keep his ducks. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. We'll get to questions later if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Mr. Dyke, you would like to approach the podium? Please identify yourself.
Yes. Mark Dyke, 2295 Van Buren, Hudsonville, Michigan. The Hudsonville mailing address, but the Georgetown, yeah, we're all familiar with that. So still don't understand it, and I grew up in this area. So thank you for allowing me a chance to speak, and thank you for coming out to look for yourselves at the pen, at the ducks, to see the setting. I think it's very important that you understand context, because that is crucial. Before I make my comments, I want to thank many people here, supporters, coming out on behalf of Dylan and us. I'll echo what the township attorney said. Please keep comments respectful. I don't envy you guys having to sit there. I've been in many zoning board meetings. I've been in construction for 20 years. This one's a little different. This is my son. So this has a little different feel to it. I also ask that people don't make this a political issue. We live in very politically charged times. I've advocated online many times. This is not about politics. This is not about who complained. This is about my son and the challenges he faces. And you hear people say it, you don't know what it's like until you have a kid with special needs, and it's true. I'll probably get a little emotional as I am now. My apologies for that, but like I said, this is a little bit different. And one other thing before I lead into the background on why we have ducks, Nibbles and Bill, I use the term neighbors quite a bit. I don't mean the house next door. I mean my community. I grew up in an area where when you say neighbors, maybe 6 houses down, 10 houses down. So I don't want anyone to misconstrue when I say the word neighbors, as I have online many times. Someone thought I was talking about a particular house. I am not. Okay? So the background, why ducks? What about Dylan? Dylan is surrounded right now by his Lynx group. His Lynx group is a peer-to-peer support group, part of Hudsonville Schools. The organizer of that is here tonight, and we have watched him develop and grow immensely because of the support group. It's kids that rally around him and help him through his day at school. They're with him now. The inappropriate for my son to be here and the trauma of what could be. His nervousness, his anxiousness has grown over the last several weeks. He will say he's confident, but he has spent more times with his ducks over the last 2 weeks leading up tonight than any other time I've seen. I don't want to lose sight of my son. Why ducks? Doctors suggested that our autistic son have an animal of some kind. So we did what most people do. We got a dog. Seems reasonable. And the dog worked quite well for about 4 years or so. He loved the dog, a yellow lab. They love to swim. We live on a lake. It's a win-win. I always wanted a yellow lab secretly, although I'm severely allergic. But unfortunately, when we were expecting our 5th child, Dylan's one of 5, the dog bit Dylan in the face, unprovoked, left a scar on him physically and emotionally. Dylan is deathly afraid of large dogs. He is now very particular about which dogs he will approach. Unless it's the size of a football, he ain't going near it. He's scared. We've tried other things. We can't have cats, severe allergy guy. He wasn't interested in goldfish, hamsters, gerbils, the typical run-of-the-mill things. And one day at Dutch Village, my wife took the kids there, and Dylan said to my wife, "If I catch a duck, can I keep it?" And my wife said, "Yeah, okay, sure, you catch a duck." The problem is at Dutch Village, they're very used to humans. And guess what Dylan did? He caught a duck. So we talked about it. We said, we live on a lake. There's ducks all around us. Sure, apparently you can buy ducks. They're like $10. So we bought a pair of ducks. They always have to be in pairs. That's important to the story. And he fixated on ducks. And everything started becoming ducks. His favorite color was yellow. And if you've seen any of the pictures in the application, you see that ducks are his thing. When an autistic kid grabs onto something, they hyper-focus. You cannot move them off of it. Now, some people will say, well, you just need to tell them to stop. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. So his thing is ducks. Okay? Our beaches, our lake, yep, numerous ducks, numerous waterfowl. Yesterday, he took Nibbles and Bill out to the lake to let them, they take a bath in the lake when he sits there and watches them. And there was one duck that hung around all day, and he went from property to property, eating and doing what ducks do. It's natural to the setting. You were there, you saw it. Lawyer spoke about Dylan's routine. He gets up every morning. First thing he does before he even opens his eyes is he walks down to those ducks, and he spends time with them. He changes their water. He gives them food. He talks to them. He goes back upstairs, does his routine of breakfast, getting ready for school, goes down and says goodbye to them before he leaves. Comes home from school, first thing he does, drops the bag. Doesn't matter if he's hungry. Doesn't matter if he has to go to the bathroom. He goes down to the ducks. He takes them out. He talks to them. He tells them about his day. I'll talk more a little bit later about the importance of these ducks. I do want to speak briefly, as Jake had mentioned, the HOA process. The current board of directors was formed spring of 17. I submitted paperwork to them shortly after, identifying the ducks. Hey, we have these. I want to make sure you're aware of it. Here's a letter from the doctor, ESAs. We got a formal response this July. And so, although there was some miscommunication back and forth, I'm confident we will, because we have been talking. The HOA president and I have been talking about solutions. How do we make everybody happy in this situation? I'm confident we will get there. I've made suggestions. I am not opposed to ideas that they may have. Additional screening. We've talked about a little pond that's sunken down. We've talked about a enclosure that is different. I am open to those discussions and willing to do that. I'm willing to talk with anyone about this issue. I've never turned anyone away. The complaints. This one's a mystery to me. And I say that because when the news story broke and TV station got a Freedom of Information Act, I actually got to see 2 complaints. And I said, oh, this is interesting to see. The HOA was doing their board saying, well, we're not going to tell you who or any of that stuff. I get it. There's a reason there's an HOA. But at the same time, we're adults, and sometimes we need to have difficult conversations. I'm a therapist. I'm a university professor. I tell my students and my clients, sometimes we have to have difficult conversations that we just don't want to have. I wish those that complained would have just come to me and said, I have an issue. Can we work something out? I'm willing and still willing to work something out. We want to be good neighbors. We're going to be in this neighborhood a long time. We're going to live with the people in this neighborhood, many of which are here tonight. And I still don't know, who has totally complained and not. I just wish they would have come to me first. I can't address an issue if someone doesn't come to me with it. Now, the HOA did come to me, and we started some discussions. The two complaints that the township received that I saw from the Freedom of Information Act, and I have not done a Freedom of Information Act to see the rest, because my focus is not on who complained and what they complain about. My focus is on solutions. What can we do? After the media attention, two people came forward and contacted me and said, I probably should have come to you sooner. I was open to dialogue. Unfortunately, as much as I appreciated one of them coming to me, he is a board member, being appropriate to have side conversations with him while I'm trying to talk to the president and the lawyers. I said, I appreciate you reaching out. It's noted. Unfortunately, I probably shouldn't have this conversation with you right now until this is resolved. Another person that reached out also said we should have come to you sooner. They also told me that the complaint they filed was a carbon copy of somebody else's complaint, but the ducks had not been a direct nuisance to them. So one of the complaints you have is admittedly in writing by the person who submitted it, a false complaint. Now, they wanted to get the township's attention. Yes, they did. We always wish we would have done things differently. I don't hold it against them. I don't hold it against anyone that complained. Let's find solutions. I have reached out since the media attention and the two people that did come to me to another person that they identified had an issue. That person has declined to talk. So you'll probably hear from them tonight. I'm going to hear some things tonight, then you're going to hear some things tonight that I've never heard. This will be new to me too. And I don't know what they're going to say. My guess is people may have an experience different than mine. I'd like to know about it. I'd like to know a solution. Let's talk about the complaints. Smell was an issue. You've all been to the house. You've all stood there. I've probably asked each one of you if I saw you, does it smell? And so the public knows, you guys don't tell me when you're coming, you just show up, which is appropriate. So it's not like I could clean it up and get it ready because I knew someone was coming. And you guys come at all times of the day. 7 at night, 9 in the morning. So there's no way to know when you guys are showing up and who is going to show up. I didn't even know any of you until now. So I think we can all agree there's not a smell there. We've been changing out the bedding every 2 weeks since we've had them. Now, if we get this nice little enclosure house, I think that would actually make things even better. Then it's easier for me to change out and for doing. They do not roam free. I saw in a report that we allow them to roam free in the backyard, and it makes it sound like they terrorize the neighborhood. You've seen these ducks. They're not a terror. Nibbles, that's how he got his name. They do little nibbles. Bill just runs away from people. I read those complaints, and it makes it sound like, these things are just running wild, unsupervised. No. And if one did get out, is it any different than a dog? What do you do if your neighbor's dog gets out? Hey, John, your dog got out, come get it. Or, hey, John, your dog pooped in my yard, can you clean it up? If that happened, just make a phone call. I did have one neighbor, one of them got out once, and he sent me a text, hey, your duck's in my backyard. I said, oh, Dylan, go get them. No harm, no foul, we're good. Okay? I have reached out many times to the neighbors just to check again. And when I say neighbors, the community. Not everyone, obviously. Just asking, is there an issue? You've heard them quack. It's not obnoxious, it's not loud, it's not nearly the level of a dog. You hear the dogs in the neighborhood very easily. You walk up to them, they will make some noise. and then they settle down. They're both males. Males quack half as much as females, statistically. I couldn't find any decibel readings on duck quacks. Yes, make your own assumptions there. But they are, for the most part, very quiet. They don't leave the yard. They look for Dylan. They don't chase after people. And I don't know what you're going to hear tonight, if it's true, if it's false, if it's exaggerated or not, but really it's not about the complaints. It's about Dylan and the solutions that can work for both, for everybody. And I'm confident in the HOA, and I will have those. There were a couple of false things in one of the statements that you guys received. Said that he doesn't spend time with them. Dylan has a routine. Autistic kids have routines. He does not vary from that routine. It throws him off. He spends lots of time with them. At least 4 times a day, he's out there with them. We're outdoor kind of people, so we're out there a lot, which means we're with them quite often. I have never called the ducks disgusting, smelly, and loud, as one of the complaints stated. False. Completely false. Someone else said that ESAs, if they really cared about, their ESAs, they should be kept indoors. Well, if I had a miniature horse as an ESA, I can't keep that indoors. You can't keep ducks indoors all the time. They eat bugs. They eat worms. They need to dig in the dirt. They need to be in the water to drink constantly. That's not a setting that you can create inside a home. So we have an outdoor pen. Based on numerous messages and conversations I have received from those in the neighborhood, we have a lot of support for Dylan and his ducks. Unfortunately, it's the week before school starts, and many of those people are at open houses tonight. But I do see many in attendance that will probably oppose. I don't know how it's going to go, whether you're going to hear more positive or negative. I don't know. Yet, those that have complained have actually, I've heard saw online, accused us of manipulating our autistic son to get sympathy. Really? Have you lived with a kid with autism? Somehow we're bullies to anyone that complained. I'm a bully for standing up for my kid and what he needs. If that's a bully, then I'm guilty. I will advocate for him. Now, some people will say, well, online, you're letting people say this and that. I can't monitor everything. I can't respond to every comment, delete every person, block every person. I have tried, and I have advocated, actually defended those in my neighborhood and the HOA in writing, saying, don't go after them. What's done is done. We hope to have a solution. But attacking people, they have a right to an opinion as well. But I'm a bully because I didn't delete everything that someone said. I'm a bully because I reached out to Dylan's Duck Adventures, the little Facebook page that we had created for Dylan when all this came about, and said, what do we do? Who knows someone? What resources are out there? We don't know what to do. And the help started pouring in. Here's a lawyer. Here's the Fair Housing Commission of West Michigan. Here's Autism Speaks. We asked for help, and we got it. And some people look at that post and say, well, you're being mean. I have not named names. I refuse to name names. I was asked before this meeting to point out some people for a TV interview that may have complained. I said I won't do it. Now people will say, well, you infer because you said this neighbor's not a problem. Right. Because they're a couple that moved into this community from outside of this community, and I didn't want them getting caught up in this mess. Right or wrong, that's what I did. Probably should wrap it up. I've been going pretty long now. Remember, I'm a university professor. We tend to speak a while. Our kids have been stopped on the sidewalk by someone we think may have complained and told nobody should have ducks as pets. They're mean. They bite people. I don't know why they would do that and not talk to us. But this hearing is not about online posts or comments. This is about Dylan and his rights, which we believe, as Jake pointed out, are protected by federal law. As I said, 20 plus years in construction industry, I've stood before many ZBAs, done this process. This one made me nervous. And I speak for a living. So that's my son. I've shown a willingness to work with neighbors, the HOA, the township. We're willing to talk. We're willing to work. I'm not going to sit here and say we've done everything perfectly. Yeah, there's things that I would have liked to have done differently. Absolutely. We've made improvements without even being asked. The screening devices, all the stuff that you guys saw, no one asked me to do that. We did it because I'm trying to be courteous to neighbors. If the ducks ever did get out of that setup we have, I would hope someone would tell me, because we'd want to grab them. Now, they're domestic. They're not going to fly away. They're not even going to swim away. They only look for Dylan. Before any of these complaints started, I made those improvements. We see on streetlight banners around town that Georgetown Township, the place to be. As Jake said, the world is watching. This has gotten a lot of attention. I don't envy you guys, because the world is watching to see, is Georgetown Township the place to be? They want to know. Dylan starts school next week. I'll wrap up with this. Denying him the variance to keep Nibbles and Bill will devastate him, set him back emotionally, academically, socially, developmentally. We saw it once when one of his ducks got taken out by a predator. He backslid like no other. I don't want to see that again. No one wants to see it again. I guarantee even anyone that opposes this are going to say, well, we don't want to see him lose his ducks. And if that's the case, great, then let's come up with solutions and quit trying to fight online about what happened. We've witnessed what happens. I would ask, if you have your application, turn to Exhibit B. Take a look at those pictures. Look at the connection. If you've watched the videos, you see he needs those ducks as much as they need him to live. There's a connection there that I cannot explain, and I'm a therapist. I'd like to read to you something. This little book was created by someone in our community, in our neighborhood, Corey Estates. Made this book about Dylan and autism and his ducks. We didn't ask her to. She made this months ago before any of this really started. I want to read to you one thing out of this in closing. Not everyone understands how much Dylan, Nibbles, and Bill need each other. It is different to have pet ducks, and not everyone understands being different. It is important for us to be sensitive to other people's differences. We can learn a lot from other people, and if we try to be understanding, we will see just how important it is to accept other people's differences. As a father, I'm asking you to grant the variance to allow Dylan to keep his emotional support animals, Nibbles and Bill. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Dyke. Ms. Dyke, would you like to offer any comments to the board? No? Okay, thank you. At this point in time, I'm going to request that Attorney Morgan present the staff report and review to the ZBA.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You should have in your possession a staff report dated July 30, 2018 that was provided in advance of the meeting, so I understand that you have had an opportunity to review that, but I would like to go through that and answer any questions that the board may have. As you're aware, this property, the subject property, is located in the township's low-density residential LBR zoning district. It's been determined, based on the language in the zoning ordinance, that the keeping of farm animals, which would include ducks, is not permitted within that district. And it is, per the township zoning ordinance, as is customary in most city and township zoning ordinances, if a particular use is not expressly authorized, it is prohibited by law. Here, the township zoning ordinance does provide for the keeping of chickens as an accessory use in the LBR district under section 3.4Q, and that is the basis for this variance request before the board tonight. I would note that, consistent with what you've heard this evening, the township did receive complaints about these ducks prior to receiving the Zoning Board of Appeals application seeking this accommodation. In response to the citizen complaints that were received, an investigation was conducted Property visits were conducted by the township's code enforcement officer, and a letter was sent with consultation with my office as well to the dikes, reminding them that the township does also enforce the International Property Maintenance Code that requires certain clean and sanitary conditions on property, and we informed the dikes through that letter that the ducks could remain on the property pending the outcome of this proceeding so long as they were in compliance. So the ducks are at the property currently. If you turn to page 2 of your staff report, you will see an aerial photograph of the property. Per the township's BSNA records, it appears that the property is approximately 95 feet by 180 feet, or approximately 0.39 acres. That's not an exact, but just to give you an idea. Pursuant to the township's district regulations that you find in Chapter 24, the LDR district has various setbacks, as you know, including a minimum 10-foot side setback. This is a developed neighborhood, as you can see from the aerial photograph. It's provided for you on page 2 excerpts of the relevant zoning ordinance sections. First, the 8.2 that lists a portion of the permitted uses in the LDR district that includes detached single-family dwellings, which is the particular use for this subject property, as well as accessory buildings and uses. Again, I referenced the 3.4Q that you also see on page 2 and 3 of your report, indicating that chickens are permitted by the township subject to certain restrictions. Starting on page 3 of the staff report is an overview of the Fair Housing Amendments Act. First, we point out that while the Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act both address animals, they do in different ways. And this case, this appeal before you, does not implicate the Americans with Disabilities Act. That pertains to only certain species, animals that are trained for a particular purpose. So while there are some similarities between the laws, to the extent there may be questions or comments about the Americans with Disabilities Act, that simply is not applicable here. The Fair Housing Act was enacted in 1968 and initially was intended to prohibit discrimination in the sale, rental, or financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, sex, later amended to include family status and disability. So it historically, if we look at the case law applying the Fair Housing Act, historically has been applied to public housing, housing providers, and landlord-tenant situations. It has not historically been applied in situations where you have single-family owner-occupied dwellings. However, there is some broad language within that act that states that public entities, and I'm not quoting the act here, public entities are required to make reasonable accommodations in their rules, policies, practices, or services when necessary to afford a person with a disability the equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling. So that language has been used in courts to challenge zoning ordinances, and courts have held that zoning ordinances fall within this category of rules and policies that are subject to reasonable accommodation. Again, the nature of the accommodation is when necessary to afford a person with a disability the equal opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling. You can probably envision, given the nature of variance requests that you've heard in the past or that come before the board, maybe a request to construct a wheelchair ramp or paved parking that encroaches on a setback. That would be more consistent with the types of variances that perhaps you've heard or decided in the past. The Fair Housing Act does address things like that, structural components, but also does provide some protection for emotional support animals. And unlike the ADA, does not restrict the breed or species or size of animals. So you may have seen in the media references to emotional support animal issues that have arisen with regard to airlines and now cruise ships. And this is being treated differently by different entities, private and public entities as well. The Fair Housing Act only tells you that an accommodation shall be reasonable. It doesn't tell you what reasonable means, and that's why this matter is before you as the zoning board. What the applicant is asking for deviates from the strict standards in your zoning ordinance. And the Zoning Board of Appeals is the public body authorized to grant deviances, variances, if you will, from the zoning ordinance when appropriate. The review process here is going to feel different because it is different from your review of other variances. You do have specific standards, as most or all communities do, that they apply when reviewing variances. And the general rule is, if you meet all of the requirements, we can grant the variance. If you don't meet all of the requirements, we're required to deny the variance. That's a fairly standard process. Here, what the applicant is asking you to do is deviate not only from the requirements within the zoning ordinance, but also to an extent your review process. So that request is being made under the Fair Housing Act, which again requires reasonable accommodations without providing any framework for what may or may not be reasonable. So I echo what the applicant and their attorney said, which is that you have a difficult endeavor here. But the factors that you apply to other types of variance requests still provide some good guidance and framework for you to apply in reviewing this request. And you see that in the staff report on pages 5 and 6, where the staff has reviewed the factors and has given its opinion as to whether the applicant has or has not, or can or cannot meet those standards. And obviously that is for the board to determine through its deliberations whether those factors are met. But I would encourage you to take a look at those standards and use those as your framework for reviewing this application. There was some mention of discussions with the homeowners association. Now, as you know, homeowners associations have, in many cases, as they do here, restrictive covenants. And those are contractual agreements between the association or the developer and the property owners, dictating what can or cannot be done on the properties within this particular association. And we see that very frequently with condominiums, subdivisions, or whatnot. The township is not required to determine whether what it believes is a reasonable accommodation would be allowed by the homeowners association, or whether the homeowners association would agree or disagree with what the zoning board of appeals were to determine if it determined that there was a reasonable accommodation to be made. The restrictive covenants that the homeowners association enforces are a private contractual matter. So the best example I can give you would be where a property owner comes to the ZBA for a variance because they want to construct an outbuilding, and it's going to encroach slightly into the setback. The ZBA's job would be to review that variance request the way it does always, apply the factors, determine if they're met. It would not matter to the ZBA, nor should it, whether the homeowners association allows outbuildings, or whether the homeowners association allows only purple or blue outbuildings, or only 6 feet tall or 10 feet tall. So I would encourage you will probably hear comments tonight. I did have some correspondence and provided you correspondence from the homeowners association. Certainly you can take that into consideration, and that would be reasonable to do so. But the zoning board and the township is not bound by the homeowners association's proposals or position on the matter. Finally, the Zoning Board of Appeals will be hearing public comment tonight. I don't know how many speakers there will be, but as we've indicated in the staff report, the Zoning Board of Appeals is not required to make a decision tonight. If you do feel that you need additional time to review the information presented to you before beginning or continuing deliberation, you have the authority to postpone your discussion to your next meeting, for example. And I understand that you've received, I believe on August 15, you received a packet containing the correspondence that the township had received to date. I understand that tonight you received, I know yesterday you may have received additional correspondence, and then yet today you received additional correspondence. So there is a lot of information in your record for you to review, and you will clearly be receiving additional input from the public tonight. So if there are questions about the process or about any of the legal aspects or about the factual aspects and the investigation done by the code enforcement officer, by all means, we're here to answer those questions for you.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. I appreciate that. At this point in time, I would like to request that Lieutenant Naraki, who is the Township Code Enforcement Officer, could you provide all of us with a bit of a summary of the complaints and how things developed?
Yes. Good evening. My name is Rich Naraki. I'm the Code Enforcement Officer. Lieutenant goes back a long ways, but I appreciate that. How this case came about, in early May, we were contacted by a board of directors of the Homeowners Association for the neighborhood that we're talking about, and said they were having a problem with a house with ducks, and wanted to know the complaint process, said they would try to resolve it themselves before filing a formal complaint. Ultimately, on May 14th, I received a formal complaint that a house had 2 ducks there and in violation of our current ordinance. I went out there on May 22nd, observed the 2 ducks at that time. So based on that, we had no other information from the homeowner. We had no request for a variance. We had no indication that they were making a claim of the Fair Housing Act. So I sent them a letter explaining that the keeping of the ducks was illegal and that we are asking compliance by removing the ducks from the property. Upon sending that letter, I received a letter back from their attorney on June 1st indicating that they would be seeking a variance and requesting an accommodation for an emotional support animal. At that point, basically, my enforcement we held off at that time. I did receive some additional complaints. When I first went out there in May 22nd, I did notice that from the adjoining properties, you could smell the area around the back of the house of Mr. and Mrs. Dyke's property. The grass was a little beat up, wet, matted down. I did receive a second complaint of the smells. So we sent them a letter just reminding them that the International Property Maintenance Code requires sanitary conditions. After I sent that letter, I did go back to check on that letter and an additional complaint and have not had any issues since then. I've received a couple additional smell complaints, but have not been able to verify it. The area has not smelled and has been kept clean since our notification letters.
Have you noticed, can you characterize the degree of change that you noticed from the first time that you encountered the property until your last encounter?
There has been an improvement. Like I said, the first time there were some smells. The grass was matted down, which may have added to that. Seemed wet. The last few times I've been out there, it's been clean. Seems like the pool water has been. They have a little small swimming pool. That was darker in color. That's been maintained. So since the letter communications, I have not spoken with Mr. and Mrs. Dyke at all. We've just been dealing with their attorneys, so, but since the letters that were exchanged, I have not had any more problems.
Does anybody on the board have any questions for Lieutenant Naraki? Kendall? No. No.
I do. What time of year was it when you were there to witness the odor?
I was out there on May 22nd.
Okay, what kind of weather?
It was warm, which could enhance the smell at that point. It was more of a, it was during our warmer season, a little bit muggy.
And I've been around ducks before to recognize that specific odor belonging to the ducks.
The odor was coming from the back of the house. What was causing it, whether it was duck feces, whether it was just matted down, rotting food, I didn't determine the type of odor. There was a distinctive smell, unpleasant smell coming from the back portion of the house at that time, which is, like I said, I haven't encountered again.
Okay.
Michael, any questions? Not this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, I'd like to entertain a motion to open the hearing to public comment. Is there a second?
I second.
Second? Okay. Is there any discussion on that matter?
In part of the motion, do you want to extend to 20 minutes? Yeah.
We have sufficient names that we could do that right now. Okay. So we'll accept a motion to extend the 20-minute time limit. So you're making that motion, correct?
I'm not. I don't know if you want to.
I'll change my motion to state that we can extend the public hearing as needed, as needed or directed by the chair, for public hearing to be open.
Okay, so currently we have a motion on the table to open the meeting to public comment. So,
we'd have to withdraw the second, I think. So.
Yes, I'll withdraw. Okay, very good, thank you. All right, now you can amend your motion and restate it, please.
I'll make a motion to open the hearing to public comment and extend the meeting as deemed necessary by the chair.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I support that.
It's been moved and seconded that the meeting be open to public comment and that the time limitation be extended as necessary. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion is carried. The meeting is now open for public comment. I have a list of the names and addresses of those who have asked to be given an opportunity to speak. Thank you. I'll start at the top of the list and we'll just proceed through the list, calling up the speakers in order. Do we have a timekeeper? Oh, perfect. Okay. All right, when your name is called, please come up to the podium, state your name and address, and keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. The first name is Mark Dyke. You'll pass? Thank you. Miss Arla Starr. Yes, you pass? So you'd like to be recalled? Nate Potter.
Nate Potter, 8382 Hardwood Drive, Jenison. July 14th, my wife and I were invited out to the Dyke residence for some conversations, some refreshments, and as we were there, we noticed, as we have noticed many times before, for a family with so many rambunctious kids being so young, their house is clean. They're clean people. Their kids are clean. They don't ever have a presentation of being an unclean group of people, certainly they wouldn't, they're not keeping unclean animals. As we went outside to the back, there were some neighbors that were having some family time out there, and one of the things that we noticed was that it was still pretty quiet. Even with the family time going on, the lake was quiet, everything was pretty calm. It was fairly warm. And one of the things I noticed was distinctly absent was any smell of any kind. The lake didn't smell, and it was fairly warm. The lake didn't smell. I don't have a problem with my smelling. It works just fine. But that was something that I was kind of in the back of my mind, could there really be something with this? Is there an issue here somewhere that maybe, because I'm not so much an emotional, I'm more of an objective kind of a person. I like the facts. And so I was kind of, feeling it out a little bit, and there wasn't. It was distinctly odorless. I thought at one point I heard some frogs out in the water, and then realized that it wasn't actually frogs. It seemed distant because it was so quiet. It wasn't frogs, it was Nibbles and Bill. They were quiet enough that it was hard to recognize whether or not that was the actual source of the noise, and it wasn't. I'm elated actually to find out that you all have been there to the property. You took the step to go out and look at it yourselves and to see, even though the code enforcement was there and saw what he saw, but you had an opportunity to see firsthand what the actual conditions are versus what the complaints have been. And I wanted to give, as somebody that has had some time at the location on site, in person, firsthand knowledge that the location was clean, odorless, and quite honestly, there was just not any rambunctious ducks running around terrorizing the neighborhood. It wasn't happening. There was no indication that the ducks were making a mess of the yard or the patio. It was just a clean environment. So I just want to make sure that I give that testimony out to you as a group, as a first-hand witness to the facts.
Thank you, Mr. Potter. Mr. Brian Dixon.
Brian Dixon, 5836 Core Drive, Hudsonville. Thank you for giving us a few minutes in an open forum to discuss the issue at hand. I'm a member of Corey State, a past board member. While on the board, I initially contacted Mark regarding their family requirements for a waiver for the animals. And other members of the board felt I was best suited to do so. My son's name is Drake, after the green-headed mallard. So I took it upon myself to do it. Time ran short during our August meeting, during our fall meetings. And one of the things that we did is we said we'd talk about it in April. Mark again reached out to us in April to discuss the animals, and at which time we had received a couple of internal complaints from a standpoint of cleanliness, odor, unapproved fencing, that type of fun stuff. Initially, I spoke to Mark again on debrief for the board, at which time we sent him a note asking what options were available for the emotional support animals, empathizing with their needs. At no point in time did we want the absolute removal of the ducks, at least from a board standpoint. We wanted to work with them on making sure that Dylan had everything he needed. I'm actually very pleased with the popularity of the issue. From a standpoint of the attention that's been granted on it, there's been a lot of changes at their house. But there's still work to be done. The immediate neighbors obviously still have some issues with some of the things that are out there. I think the makeshift fence is probably a little bit on the lesser side of what we would expect for our homeowner association from that standpoint. From a standpoint of being one of the first persons to reach out to you folks to discuss what our options were, I like the idea of a chicken coop variance. I think from a standpoint of what they have there, I think that would probably be amenable to a lot of our neighbors. While outdoor animals are not allowed in our HOA for specific reasons, noise, foul or noise complaints, any kind of foul smell, I think that variance would probably be pretty well in line. I think our board of directors is eager. I'm no longer on the board, but I think our board of directors is very eager to make something work with the dikes. As I said before, we never asked for the absolute removal of the ducks. I have a strong feeling that if the dikes and the board works within our homeowner association to make something amenable, I think that this issue can be put to rest in a very, very short order. So it's the best of both worlds. Dylan maintains his emotionally support animals, and our little HOA goes back to a nice, calm, peaceful, quiet, odorless HOA that we have out there. So thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Folks, just in the interest of moving through, I understand you all appreciate the comments on both sides, but could you hold the applause just so we can move through? Next up is Mr. Scott Morehouse.
Thank you. Scott Morehouse, 5844 Coy Drive. Guess I'll be the first person to not get applause since you've now cut that off. So my name is Scott Morehouse. I live in the neighborhood. Currently serve on the association board. So I'll offer some comments on the association's history and perspective on this matter. Start with a little bit of history. The family introduced some ducks into their first home in the neighborhood. At the time, there was very little containment. The ducks roamed free through properties and the lakes. That caused many problems across many different properties. It was informally discussed. At the time, the association was managed by the developer, and there was no neighborhood involvement or control of the association at that time. They moved out of the neighborhood for a while, lived either with indoor or no ducks for a period of time, came back in a new house, and reintroduced a second set of ducks. There weren't any requests for variances either to the HOA or to the township that we're aware of at that time. There were continued conversations after an extended period of time and without really complete resolution. Both the HOA and then ultimately the township were contacted to get directly involved in the matter. Contrary to much of the media coverage and some of the approach that's been put out there on this, this has not been about the desire to take away support animals or take that consideration away from a family that needs it. It's really been about the failure to integrate these animals in a manner that would be acceptable for any pet in a neighborhood setting. So you've heard some of this. I'll offer a little bit of specifics on some of the issues that have been faced. Some gaps in containment led to the ducks being out, defecated on a neighbor's yard. They've roamed around the properties. There's been some signs of aggression towards some on that. And there's been some inconsistent maintenance regarding the animals area. The sanitation, including some water, changing out of the bedding and ground cover, the scattering of food throughout the animals area for the food to walk around and eat throughout the day at their own pleasing. The odor, heard several comments on that. We've seen that during seasons of wet and dampness, it's particularly noticeable. At times of summer heat, dryness, it does tend to go away, but it doesn't seem to be related by changes. It's more weather-based in our observation. The noise management, nuisances, the quacking of the animals throughout the day, and the fact that they live outdoor, unattended for the majority of the day, except for the times the family's out there interacting with them. So some of those are historical, some of those are current. There have definitely been improvements. We look forward to continuing to engage to drive those the rest of the way to conclusion for something that works for all parties. I think as the township considers the variance, we ask that it maintain some consistency so that all parties involved in the township understand what to expect, that it be included to prevent negative impacts to others, that it be modeled around a common approach that would work both for this situations and other situations with similar requests. So, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you. Mr. Jake Lombardo.
I'll pass, thank you.
He'll pass, all right. Mr. Jay Schapp.
Good evening. My name is Jay Scott. I live at 2281 Van Buren Street in Hudsonville. In March 2016, we moved into our new home on Quarry Lake. 6 months later, we welcomed the Dyke family next door with their 5 children and 2 ducks. The ducks' home consisted of some makeshift walls and a plastic baby gate, the kind that makes about a 10-foot diameter circle. During the 18 months following, the ducks regularly ventured into the neighboring yards, foraging through the grass and, yes, pooping wherever they happened to be. The ducks were not carefully confined at that time. Modest winds would cause the baby gate to tip over, giving the ducks free access to the neighboring yards, ours included. There've been at least 4 to 6 times that I've either called or texted Mark about the need for the ducks to be kept out of our yard. Nibbles and Bill frequently visited our yard. On one occasion, the ducks began feeding on my rhododendron, so I went outside, herded the ducks back into the pen, closed the gate. When Dylan came home from school, he expected his ducks to be out in the yard. He approached me to ask if I'd seen anyone put his ducks into the pen. I told him that I had put the ducks back in the pen and the reasons for doing so. He went home, returned a few minutes later, and apologized for his ducks. Past April, I went through our yard with a plastic bag and a pooper scooper to pick up the deposits left over the winter. We did have a few visits by wild ducks and geese, but by far the most frequent visits were Nibbles and Bill. I filled a bag 3 to 4 inches deep with the winter's worth of deposits. On April 16, I received an unusual text from Mark where he asked if Dylan's ducks were a nuisance for me, and we wanted to be a good neighbor and sensitive about his pets. In the weeks prior to that text, the dykes had made a lot of changes in the duck pen, including replacing the baby gate with a fence. They were doing a much better job of keeping the ducks confined to the pen. Finally, after 18 months, some progress was being made, and we're happy about that. May 25, we learned that the dykes received the township letter that the ducks had to go. That's when it made sense to us why the duck pen had improved. Over the past 2 years, we've been able to get to know our immediate neighbors. I want to be clear, they are all terrific neighbors. They are not mean people, and no one has any ill will toward Dylan. We just don't want the ducks in our yards along with the problems they create. It's that simple. Some conditions have improved, but the current outdoor pet environment doesn't work in a residential area. The variance is given. What assurance do the neighbors have that history will not repeat itself? What enforceable restrictions would be set in place? Does it then become the neighbor's responsibility to police the duck situation? The neighbor shouldn't have to be in that position. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I apologize for the mispronunciation of your name.
No problem. Happens all the time.
Judy, is it Matei?
Did pronounce it correctly. I am Judy Matei, 7711 Coachman Lane, and I do not live near these people, but the issue has touched my heart as a grandma. I don't know if Dylan ever went to the Early Childhood Center. Okay. Well, at the Early Childhood Center, for 7 years, I read stories to the kids, and I was known as Grandma Judy. And my heart goes out to this family, and I just come with one of the words that the lawyer spoke about, finding a solution and being reasonable. And I ask that God's mercy will prevail here and that this family will find a solution. And I hope that the neighbors, whomever they are, will, when they get up in the morning, will think of Dylan and this 12-year-old boy rather than the deposit of poop that the ducks leave, and that they will think of a solution and mercy.
Thank you. Maggie Phillips.
Good evening. My family and I are neighbors with Mark and Jen Dyke, and they have 5 incredible kids that we have gotten to know and love. So, as a neighbor, I wanted to explain how this situation came to the point of a complaint being filed for us. For us, the issue at hand has never been about Dylan. We love Dylan. The issue has been about the ducks. I brought a picture of what the situation looked like.
Ms. Phillips, could I ask you to speak a little closer to the microphone or tilt it down or?
Okay, can you hear me now?
That's better.
Okay. I brought a picture of what things look like in the spring of this year. It was 18 months after they moved in. The pen the ducks were held in was not secure at times, and they were left to wander with no one outside watching them. One of the ducks is quite aggressive and chased my husband. He has his own disability, CP, and he had to basically swat it away to not be attacked or bitten, and I believe Mrs. Dykes saw that happen. The ducks would often wander into our yard with our small children playing, and I would have to stand on guard to make sure the kids would not be chased or bitten. The ducks also had pooped on our yard, beach, and patio. After complaints were filed, efforts were made to make the duck pen fencing more attractive and more secure. However, many issues still remain, having ducks in a little backyard in a residential neighborhood. Ducks are dirty and they poop often, as much as every 15 minutes, and their feces are highly bacterial. I think when you go to the zoo and farms, you see the signs, wash your hands, because you can get very sick from duck feces, even farmed ones. And the duck pool and pen are dirty. They create a haven for attracting flies and mosquitoes, and they don't know where the property lines are, the flies and mosquitoes. On our patio, we're actually closer to the ducks than they would be if they sit at their patio. The ducks in their habitat do absolutely smell. We don't always smell them. During the summer, it gets a lot better, but when it is there, it's very pungent. This spring was terrible. We had a birthday party outside on June 9. The smell was horrific, and all of our guests had to smell it the entire time they ate their food. And food is not kept in containers. Food is thrown out and scattered over the ground. And we live, obviously, with fields across the street, and rats could come from across the street. And I have pictures. And the stagnant water that often sits there that attracts the flies and mosquitoes and food being scattered. The ducks are also louder than you would think. They are in their pen for over 23 hours a day, so when we're outside sitting right next to them, they try to get our attention through that. So I believe we all need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture. I do not believe anyone wants to harm Dylan or his family, and we do not to be harmed either. We just want the association and the township ordinances to be upheld so neighbors can live in a safe and sanitary manner. These rules are in place for a reason, to protect homeowners and keep everyone safe. My hope is that ducks
All right, Ms. Phillips, I'm sorry, time's up here.
Be upheld.
Thank you. I'm sorry to have to restrict it. Mr. Brandon Phillips? No? Jeannie Boschoven?
My name is Jeannie Boschoven, and I'm at 810 Oakley in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I've been so touched by all the news issues, and I think the situation, the innocence of all this is just so precious to me. It's just overwhelming. I feel like I've met Mark and Jen and Dylan, and I am absolutely in love with Nibbles and Bill. There's just no way about saying that I'm not. I used to be activities director, down the street at Sunset Manor. I was there for about 10 years, and I had a therapy dog work with me, and I worked with the Alzheimer's unit, and I worked with assisted living both east and west, and in 10 years, you work with a lot of seniors, and almost all of them in the 3 departments I was in were very highly special needs. And I also had several special needs kids work for me for all those years. And I know having animals in, I had the zoo come in, and just the specialness. And the other level that brought me here, besides just, my husband said I'm a subject matter expert, so we just wanted to I had a duck when I was 16 years old, and I've written a couple books, but my first book actually has a small chapter about my relationship with a duck. And the combined relationship, the bond that I had, was just tremendous, and the duck's bond with me is tremendous. And that combined with working with special needs people and special needs children, if we can find a compromise, I would love to go behind the scenes and offer anything that I can. I think that's the issue here, because I see all sides, but I am on the side of this family and their animals because I've been there. And it's, unless you had a duck fall in love with you, and unless you maybe have had some special issues that these solve. There's got to be some humane, respectful way that we can find a compromise. And I just want to put myself out there to go behind the scenes. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Jimmy Boshoven?
Jim Boshoven, 810 Oakley, Northwest Grand Rapids, and you may wonder why some Grand Rapids people are involved here, but as Jeannie said, she was very involved as activities director at Sunset. I raised my kids here in Georgetown Township. They went to Gladiola, graduated from Jenison. We came here because of the community, so I just feel like I have some roots here. I have two brothers. Each one has a special needs child. I understand very clearly, what Mark and Jen are going through and the value of having not just something, but something that they literally bond with at a level that I don't think any of us can understand. So it's really, really special, I think, to try and find a compromise. My house here was on Berger Lake, so I also had lakefront property. I was part of I was on the board of directors for the Lake Association. So believe me, I see both sides as well. I don't envy the homeowners association. Been there, done that. It's extremely difficult. I think our attorney friend here said it reasonable. My wife said the word compromise. I think there's a way forward here. I'm not sure that the way forward is with the zoning board. I really believe it's probably with the homeowners association. But if there's anything that the zoning board can do to remove any barriers and let it get back to being handled by the association, and I ask, please consider that in your decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Roger Phillips. I would please remind everyone to contain your comments toward the board. We can't allow an interaction in the community here. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Roger Phillips. I live at 1057 Aberdeen Way in Hudsonville. I'm the father of Brandon and Maggie Phillips. They live next door. Basically, I think everybody agrees that nobody wants to hurt Dylan. And as far as the ducks, we're not against ducks. Nobody's against the ducks. The issue here is cleanliness that has been brought up. That is a great concern. It's a great concern for me. We had a good friend that we knew for 20 years. And he lived right behind Meyer Gardens. And last fall, he was cleaning up his grasses and stuff around his house. And he did not have his gloves on. And finished that and finished the fall cleanup. And then slowly started being very sick. And he died shortly after the first of the year. And the doctors were just totally amazed. This guy was so healthy his whole life, 72 years old. And went to the hospital and he died 2 days later. And the cause of death was from duck feces. Somehow, in the cleaning up process, he got it under his fingernails. And there's a lot of ducks around Meyer Gardens. And that's what the cause of death was. So that is a concern of my daughter-in-law, of Jay as he spoke, having to clean up the duck feces. Now, you've heard, and I understand, and I appreciate the fact that they have gone to great lengths to stop that. But this is initially what started this whole thing. And the other question I would just have is, did the Dykes know ahead of time, before they bought this property and moved there, that there was a ruling against having ducks? That is a question. I don't know that question, but that is a question that should be asked. And if they did know, why didn't they ask for a variance at that time? So that would be an important question. And then quickly in 24 seconds, you've got a chicken policy where you can have chickens. I don't know a lot about that policy, but is the policy that chickens are allowed to roam out of their yard? That's just a question I have. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Nancy Haynes? Elizabeth Stoddard?
Elizabeth Stoddard with the Fair Housing Center, West Michigan, located at 20 Hall Street, Southeast in Grand Rapids, Michigan. We're a private nonprofit organization that serves 12 counties in West Michigan. Our purpose is to eliminate practices of housing discrimination and promote open and diverse communities. So we are here in support of a decision by the township that upholds the purpose and importance of the Federal Fair Housing Act. The Federal Fair Housing Act, as Attorney Morgan stated, prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability as it was amended in 1988. And that prohibition includes a refusal to make a reasonable accommodation that's necessary for a person with a disability. And I think reasonable accommodations are so important under the Fair Housing Act because sometimes for a person with a disability to have equal access, they might need something a little bit different. So equal doesn't always mean the same. And so I think sometimes for someone that might be a wheelchair ramp, is that something different, or an assistive device, a flashing smoke alarm. In this case, it's ducks. That's the something different that's going to allow this family to live in this home. I think without this variance, it's possible that the Dykes would not be able to live in this home. I just wanted to comment on one legal aspect that was brought up. We've heard a lot about the term reasonableness, and I think with reasonable accommodations, that often can be the tricky part of it, but it's not a completely innocuous concept. There is a legal framework to consider whether or not something is reasonable. And the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Justice issued a joint statement on reasonable accommodations and land use decisions specific for issues like this. And the standard of reasonableness is whether the accommodation would impose an undue financial and administrative burden on the township, or if it would fundamentally alter your local zoning scheme. And so I think in terms of reasonableness and the Fair Housing Act, those are the two things that you could be considering in your mind as to whether or not this request on behalf of the Dykes is reasonable under your ordinance. And I think, like Attorney Morgan mentioned, oftentimes you might be considering a wheelchair ramp or something like that. And I just encourage you to think about if there were neighbors who didn't like the appearance of that ramp, as opposed to is it fundamentally altering the scheme of your zoning, similar to the issue of the ducks. And also in keeping with that, I think just mentioning that the Dykes are not asking to use their home as anything other than a single-family home. They're not asking to be in the business of raising ducks. They're not asking to do anything other than live in this home as their house where everyone can use it and enjoy it. And for Dylan to be able to use and enjoy this home as a single-family home, he needs his ducks there. Thank you.
George Brown.
Good evening. My name is George Brown. I live at 865 Baldwin here in Jenison. A number of people have mentioned that they didn't envy the decision that you all have to make tonight. And one of the things that maybe you haven't heard is thank you. Appreciate the fact that in a community such as ours, we have neighbors and friends that are willing to put themselves out there and be able to do these things and listen to the people and do the things that are important here. More importantly, are willing to look at not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of the law and what we're trying to accomplish. There's no sense going over and over the same things everybody else has done, and we've all seen the media. It's been amazing. We live in interesting times, don't we? I mean, with the internet and everything else that's going on, it's quite amazing to see all the coverage that this has gotten. But I keep coming back. Every time I think of this, I think about a quote from Pearl Buck. She's a Nobel Prize-winning author. And she said the test of a civilization is how we treat our most vulnerable people. And this is a test of us. This is a test of everything that we do. The word that keeps coming back over and over again is reasonableness. It's a test of reasonableness. Is an accommodation reasonable? Is taking care of the child reasonable? It takes all of us. It takes everything in a community. I'm sure there are times where I might be doing something that my neighbors don't appreciate, but they come to me and they talk to me, and I'm sure that the neighbors have come and talked to Mark and his family and the things they've tried to do. But at the very end, it's about a 12-year-old boy. That's all this is really about. It's a 12-year-old boy that needs a reasonable accommodation, and that's all they're asking for. And I hope in your wisdom you'll listen to that and you'll think about that and realize that what makes Georgetown Township special is because it's home. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're guessing it might be Chloe Burghorst. Okay. Thank you.
Right now, I live at 3245 Wilson Avenue, Southwest in Granville, but I just moved out of my parents' house, which is located at 3561 Stephanie Drive, which is in Hudsonville. As a person with a brother considered to be on the autistic spectrum, some may know him as Quinn Burghorst, who goes to Hudsonville. This touches very closely to my heart. Honestly, you shouldn't have to have that type of relationship to feel this way, but it makes me sad to see people in this place where I have grown up, that people who live here treat him like that. And it's heartbreaking, and it makes me scared for him and people like him. And I personally feel for their son, and I understand. I understand so much. Anyways, this is so hard to explain because people such as my brother see and feel things on a different level than we do as mentally healthy people. And taking something away that gives such emotional support would be catastrophic. See it as a death, but a death that you will never forget and you will obsess for forever. I wish I could make those who oppose this feel so much more deeply, and you all wish no ill on him or whatever, but I kind of doubt that just a little bit. And I want to make them understand that this is not only selfish, but to be frank, I see this as a hate crime against those with disabilities. I don't care how strict the rules may be, but we are talking about hurting an actual human being. And what's more important, the well-being of your grass and your nostrils or an actual human being? And amongst other things, you have hatred in your heart if you try to do anything to take away those with disabilities. So I ask anyone against this to really think about your motives and if they are selfishly based, because as you've seen where this world is right now, everyone could probably use a little bit of love.
Thank you. Nancy Johnson. Nancy Johnson. All right. Joe Nichols.
Joe Nichols, 5658 Corey Drive. I live about 4 doors down from the house in question. So what I would say is I don't know any of the parties involved. I'm pretty actively involved with the association. I try to attend it, and we do have a great neighborhood. I live about 100 yards from that house, and I look at those ducks frequently. I've never seen them out. I don't smell them. I don't hear them. They're not a nuisance to me. What I would say in regards to that, though, I had a pair of dogs next door to me that were a nuisance. Every morning at 7:30, they came out, pooped in my front yard, and had the same problem in the spring where I had to go pick up 60 piles. It's extremely, extremely frustrating. So I empathize with all parties involved. What I've heard here tonight is it sounds like there's a lot of room to negotiate and find a happy medium. And the path to doing that would be for the zoning board to approve it and kick it back to the association. We have a great group of people. We have a great neighborhood. I'm sure that collectively, if we all work together, we can find a way to resolve this.
Thank you. Is Nancy Johnson here? Okay, thank you. Is it Maya Hahn?
My name's Maya Hahn. I'm on 2091 Quarry Drive in Hudsonville. I'm a member of this lake community. My family lives on East Lake, which is part of Georgetown Shores and not on the actual lake of the dikes. I do not know the dikes, but their story has touched me and I feel compelled to be here to support them. First off, I have been an autism specialist in the field of ABA, Applied Behavioral Analysis, and speech-language pathology for the last 21 years. I'm also a mother to my 11-year-old son with autism. When I hear Mark talk about the social and emotional needs of Dylan with these ducks, I can testify that children with autism do have very unique needs, and accommodations for successful daily living is absolutely necessary. Sorry. If you don't work with these special population of people who actually live with a child with autism, you cannot possibly understand the magnitude of hardship that it brings. Autism is hard. It's hard on the individual and the families. The daily accommodations that we make to help our children maintain a calm, less anxious, and positive life are daily. And we need everyone in our community to help us. When I heard Dylan's story, I could not believe that anybody would consider not helping this family. So I felt compelled to be here today. The argument about disease and feces in our neighborhoods, I feel are invalid. We live on a lake. I have flocks of ducks and geese on our lakes every day. They come year-round. I went on vacation for 2 weeks. I came home this week, and my duck, my beach, and my kids' swim mat are covered in poop. This is part of living on a lake. To think that somebody is arguing to get rid of ducks on our lakes is amazing. And such important ducks. I think that this family deserves our support. I think of a disability and special needs. If a family that came in and had a wheelchair and needed to get into their home, who is going to complain that they have a wheelchair ramp getting into their home? I don't see this being any different. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Becca Edema?
My name is Becca Edema. I live at 4179 Crest Lane Drive in Hudsonville. I have 2 kids who attend Hudsonville Public Schools at Baldwin Street and now an incoming freshman. We didn't know the Dyke family until just recently. Our kids don't go to similar schools. They met in sports, and we've had the opportunity to visit the Dykes' home a few times over. When we started this conversation and hearing about the issues that were proceeding with this, my husband and I were discussing it, and he actually kind of laughed, and he said, you know, this sounds an awful lot like you and the war you have with our neighborhood cats. I live in Georgetown Forest. We have a ton of chipmunks and squirrels, and many of our neighbors have outdoor cats. Our sandbox has a tendency to be the favorite place for those cats to use as their litter box. My yard gets an odor. I have put different sprays out there to deter these cats. We have dogs. They don't seem to care. We have put lids on the sandbox. We have made the accommodations to accept these animals in our community. I would ask to give consideration that those types of things occur in all communities. I have family members that also have autism. In this circumstance, this family is asking for something very small in the struggles that they face on a regular basis, and I would hope that our community could come together and find a way to support them.
Thank you. Kimberly DeVries.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. My name is Kimberly DeVries. I live at 3551 Stephanie Drive. I'm speaking not as someone in the neighborhood, not as someone who knows this family. I've only had a brief conversation with Mr. Dyke. I speak like several others have tonight as a parent of a child with autism, and I'm going to get choked up too. I apologize. And I would remind this group of the importance of the focus on this is a reasonable accommodation. If I found an animal or anything that would help my son who's sick and at home, that would help him regulate, that would help him focus, that could help him have a conversation with me that my 3-year-old can have but my 6-year-old cannot, I would be before this board myself petitioning for that animal in whatever state I needed to. So I have the utmost respect for how this board and how the HOA and how the Dykes have handled this situation. And I've lived in Georgetown Township for 3 years, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm really reminded of why I'm happy to be here because of this experience. But I would speak in support of the family because of that, because I know from a personal experience how helpful something like that could be, because we have searched for something like that, or are searching for something like that, and have not found that. So for Dylan to have that, I think it would be a perfectly reasonable accommodation for this zoning board to grant a variance so that he is able to keep those ducks. I would also remind the board and this group that we are often asked as citizens of the United States to inconvenience ourselves slightly for those with disabilities. Dylan is in a protected class. This is not a situation of a pet who is pooping on a lawn. This is an emotional support animal, which is a different categorization in law than a pet, and has protections that a pet. I have a cat. A pet does not have. I can't let my cat do anything. But this is an emotional support animal, and I would remind the zoning board and this group that they deserve and get special protection, because we as a society have said that those with disabilities are protected and that those with disabilities have a higher standard if we're going to affect their accommodation that they have. So I would just remind this board and ask this board to consider this as a very reasonable accommodation, particularly the house on a lake, particularly in this area, and I would thank you for your attention and your time in this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott DeVries.
I actually thought to sign up, not stand up, but I'm still going to speak. I've known the Dykes since 2011. They've been a great, loving family. They've been a wonderful, loving family for all the kids. They've been a big impact in my life. Yeah. Positive people you can go to on a daily basis to talk to you, sit with you. And Dennis was like all kinds of special kids. They need the help. And if you don't have a kid that has special needs, or you don't know a kid, then you're not likely to go out of your way to get to know them. It's easier just to walk away from a kid that has special needs to get to know them, see what they're like, how are their lives different from us. We wake up every day. Oh, something happens? Okay, I can adjust. The special needs kids cannot adjust. They need help, they need parents, they need animals, they need support. It can be an animal, it can be a person, but they need that thing to make them feel comfortable. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Tara Angus.
Hi, Tara Angus. I live at 1514 Erin Street here in Jenison. And I want to go back to something that your lawyer said. And she had defined part of the Fair Housing Act as the use and enjoy a dwelling. A dwelling such as a single-family home like the Dykes live in. In order for Dylan to enjoy his dwelling, his ducks are necessary. Let me explain. The use of an emotional support animal is to help an individual function and enjoy life. To qualify as an emotional support animal, the individual must have an emotional disability with a letter written from a professional. This isn't a letter, and this isn't something that everyone can just simply have or obtain. Dylan's family has done both of these. And that falls under the ESA. So as a school counselor, I've worked with youth ages 5 to 24. And part of our job as school counselors is to help find what will help an individual function each day. And that is the big thing about emotional support animals, is it is to help the individual function. Without the ESA, the individual might not be able to have the same quality standards of life, or to be able to enjoy life the same. I know Dylan's family. I've known his mother for several years. I've had the opportunity to meet both of his ducks on several occasions. My daughter has met the ducks. She often asks, can we go back over and see Dylan's ducks? She enjoyed several months ago being able to feed them grapes. She just thinks the ducks are great. And one of the things is when you meet Dylan and you see his ducks, you can just see the pride that he has. And because of those ducks and his routine, he's able to function each day. Myself as a school counselor, we always look for things to help youth function so that they can stay in the least restricted environment. Those are the two things we always look for. And for Dylan, it's really his ducks. Sounds like the family is willing to make some different accommodations to help, kind of spruce up the area. They're willing to work with the FSA, all of those kind of things to be able to help Dylan keep his ducks truly to function. So I would just like to bring something back to remind you all that indeed ducks are a reasonable accommodation for an ESA for a family that lives on a lake. There's no way that we can ensure that there will be no ducks on the lake as far as the cleanliness. Okay? The wild ducks, wild geese, we know who will be there. There will be fecal matter. So each individual homeowner sounds like will have that because they live on a lake. So it's important to remember that Dylan's family is willing to work to ensure that their area, and if the ducks get out, that they keep it clean. Wild ducks. Thank you.
Elijah Dude? Aaliyah Dode, I'm sorry.
My esteemed council members, I'm Aaliyah Dode in 1471 Chipwood Street, Jenison, Michigan. My esteemed council members and township neighbors, hello, my name is Aaliyah and I am 9 years old. Do you have a fun dog or a perfect kitten? I do. Would you or your children be heartbroken if you had to give away their beloved pet? I know. I would feel lost without my Bella. At school, I am in a peer-to-peer program which links students with students who have disabilities such as autism. To help give daily support as a volunteer, this program, I have seen firsthand how isolated and lonely my buddies have felt at times. Knowing how much love and joy Bella brings me, I could only imagine how much more Dylan's feathery friends bring him. Lastly, even if you don't consider Dylan's emotional needs, under the Fair Housing Act of 1988, Section 808, Paragraph F, in reference to the Rehabilitation Act, Section 504, even when no pets are allowed, a landlord is required to make accommodations for pets that provide emotional support for a person with disabilities. A letter from a doctor or a therapist is all needed to classify an animal as an assistant animal. My daddy is an apartment manager. He has to abide by these laws, and as a kind-hearted human being, so should we. He even had to allow a fox to live in his complex. I realize that ducks might seem a little unconventional, like a fox, but I believe fulfillment these ducks bring Dylan is unmeasurable. Thank you for hearing my argument. The end.
You have a future in law.
You can do better.
Okay, we're going to go back to Brandon Phillips, who passed.
Hi, my name is Brandon Phillips. I live at 2309 Van Buren Street. Dylan's disability is not lost on me. And I guess the most frustrating part for me is to see the way that it's been handled and the way that if there was never an issue, it wouldn't have come before you today. We just want things taken care of the way they should be. And we have a great neighborhood. We used to be really close friends with the Dykes. Hopefully we can get back to that point again. All we want is it to be cleaned up the way that it needs to be. They say they're not aggressive. I've seen firsthand that they are aggressive to both adults and to kids, and there are people here that would testify to that. It's not the Dykes' fault that they're aggressive, they're just being ducks. And the only thing that I want to say is if they were contained more, if they were looked after better, this would have never come up to you before today. So I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Arla Starr? Okay. Nancy Haynes. Nancy Johnson. Mr. Lombardo?
I think my client would have.
Okay, Mr. Dyke.
I want to take the opportunity to address just a couple of the things that we've heard tonight. Someone had mentioned a move. We've been in this neighborhood for about 10 years. We lived in another house in the neighborhood, and as our family grew from 3 to 5 kids, we built a larger house. So yes, I moved down the street and around the corner. It required me to live in a condo for about 3 months because I had to get out of my current house. So it's not like we left and went away and then came back, years later. The pool water may look dirty. That's mud. They dig in the dirt. They clean their beaks off in the water. They clean themselves off in the water. It's changed every day. The food is stored in my house. It is not stored outside. The food that they do have in a bowl is inside in an enclosure that is changed out every day. And from time to time, Dylan will feed them lettuce and tomatoes that he gives them, and any that is left over, usually not much, he cleans it up. I'm adamant about that. We did, when we first moved in, I'll admittedly not have a great system. The picture of the plastic gate was a temporary fix until we could do something more permanent that looked nicer. And yeah, it blew down a few times. I'm hearing a lot of these things now tonight for the first time, as I said I probably would. Disappointing to me is that there's a process for addressing that. 1, directly. 2, there is an HOA. An HOA that probably we should have had a discussion about very specific things that I heard here tonight and addressed them. However, the HOA filed a complaint. The timing of that complaint is significant. I also want to add, it goes up. Oh, you get extra time? Not moving. And time stood still. I'll just add, I think we can come to resolution. I think we can come to an agreement that works for everyone. You guys, though, at this point, it's risen to the level of coming before you for a zoning variance. You must address it accordingly. My hope is that you grant that variance and that I can continue to work with the HOA on the specifics of what is acceptable. I've offered up many ideas to them on what I would like to see. I hope it goes through. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has not spoken who is interested in speaking? This will be please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Joel Barr. I'm a longtime Georgetown Township resident
and also the attorney for the Corey Estates Homeowners Association.
Mr. Barr, could we get an address for the record?
Absolutely. 4393 Oak Meadow Drive, Hudsonville, Michigan. As a longtime attorney whose practice involves professional problem solving, it saddens me that people have attempted to divide our community over this issue. They're wrong. Not one person here has spoken tonight asking you to take away the ducks. We're in agreement. Growing up, I watched the TV show Home Improvement. Loved it. Tim Allen's a Michigan native. Went to Western. I loved the character Wilson. You never saw his face, but he was there to give good advice to his neighbor Tim, the tool man, whenever he needed it, and Tim needed it a lot. How did we get here? Everybody's right, but the process went wrong. There was a lack of communication, and there was a lack of problem solving. Things have been aired tonight, apparently for the first time. Lack of communication, lack of problem solving. I got involved recently. The first thing that I suggested that we do is try to figure out a resolution. Proposals were sent over. Here's what the association would like to see as a reasonable accommodation. And you've seen those things. They're reasonable. The association, all of the members, including the Dykes, deserve expectations that can be met, and expectations that can be met in the future, and expectations everybody can agree to. That's the goal here. And that is fair. But not one neighbor has said the ducks have to go. Everybody deserves a certainty of expectations. One neighbor's rights should not impose upon another neighbor's rights. I'd ask that you carefully review the recommendations that the association has made to date. We have not received a response. It's been crickets. We'd like to get there, and maybe this board can help. But what we have outlined is a more than reasonable accommodation to allow the ducks to remain while allowing all neighbors to live in harmony with each other. That's the goal here. On that, we agree. And I've said this to 100 times to association boards that I've worked with. At the end of the day, you're neighbors. Communicate. Talk to each other. Problem solve. Because you're neighbors. So let's peek across the property lines and say, "Heidi ho, good neighbor." Start the conversation and get this rolling. But our community is not divided. We are stronger than ever. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
I would. I think it's very important that we keep some perspective here. The question was just raised, how did we get here? I'll tell you. The HOA, Mr. Barr's client, filed a formal complaint. That's how we got here. It's no mystery. And they did so in the face of the Dykes begging for a resolution, asking, when's the next meeting? When's the next meeting? We would like to address some of these issues. Those requests went unanswered. So I want to be very clear about who did what and when they did it. It's true, no member of the HOA has said, get rid of the ducks. But at this point, what the HOA and the homeowners are saying is a little bit irrelevant. Because of HOA formal action, the township has said, get rid of the ducks. So there's no mystery as to how we got here. I want to be very clear about that. The Dykes have been and continue to be, in spite of the fact of the way they've been treated by their own homeowners association, willing to reach a resolution. We've been asking for one for a year and a half. We got one 5 days ago. So yes, we will continue the dialogue. We very much hope that we have the opportunity to do so, but first we have to get past this step. I wish we weren't here either, but the fact of the matter is we are. So good luck in your deliberations. Thank you again.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has not spoken who would like to? This will be the last call for public comment.
Carol Heiser, 6920 40th Avenue. Just really quick.
Hang on, Carol.
Okay.
What is the spelling on your last name, please?
Huyser.
Okay. And Manette, did you get the address? Thank you.
Okay. When this whole thing came about, I have a grandson who's autistic too. But I said I would be happy. I would go over and help them build a pen. We'll all come together and buy the stuff and make it so that this doesn't have to happen, because it is separating so many people. And the humanity of this community is getting lost. So I would love to do that. I will happily, and we will get a whole bunch of people together to help you build this pen to keep those ducks and to make the neighbors happy. I get it. You know, I have squirrels and chipmunks and everything pooping everywhere too, and some animal that comes up and eats, and I don't know what it is, but that's just living here, and it's part of living here. So that's all. We will just happily go help them build a pen if you guys will give us the opportunity and just let that poor kid eat his ducks. That's all. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you. I second that motion. It's been moved and seconded to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion?
Just a comment. This has been a civil meeting. I appreciate the way people handle themselves. It's been informative for us. We have to kind of sort through some of the information and so that we've been given, but you guys have done a good job, and I appreciate that.
Indeed, I would agree, and I appreciate the fact that everyone respected the 3-minute limit and was willing to move on. We appreciate that very much. It's been moved and seconded that the board close the hearing to public comment. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion is carried. The meeting is now closed to public comment. Now that the public hearing portion of the meeting is closed, Mr. Lombardo, do you have any additional comments relevant to the application?
I don't, but I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, thank you. At this time, the members of the zoning board will now have an opportunity to ask questions and discuss the documentary information and the public input provided. The board may ask questions or request additional information from any of the parties. If you are requested to come up and answer a question, would you please come to the microphone and respond? And we'll just start off with Mr. Kendall Gravel. Do you have any questions?
I do, but I'm going to save those to see how this starts.
I'm sorry?
I said I'll save them for just in a minute.
Okay, very good. Michael?
Not at this time, but we might circle back.
Okay. Joyce, how about you?
I'm struggling a little bit with the timeline of the complaints and how they got started. And the homeowners association's claims that the dikes did not respond in a proper manner. I guess, I don't know if that's a question or if anybody can respond to what the actual timeline. That's why I asked Mr. Naraki how, when he got involved and when he noticed an odor and, when things were cleaned up and why, and, a neighbor stating that things were cleaned up because of the complaints. I'm a little confused by that because when I was out there, I noticed the landscaping that was cared for. And I'm in the business, so I know when people take care of their home and when they don't. So if someone can clear up the timeline for me, the homeowners association makes it sound like this has been going on for over a year, and maybe I'm confused by that. So
gaps, maybe we'll have to tag team this thing, but the dikes requested a variance from the HOA, which they're also requested to do. The same kind of framework applies. The HOA has to consider reasonable accommodations as well because they're considered a housing provider under the Fair Housing Amendments Act. And so before any complaints or anything happens, the Dykes went to the HOA board president, and this was about a year and a half ago, and said, hey, we want to extend the dock out further than we're allowed, and something else, and by the way, we have these ducks, is that all right? Can we have those? HOA procedures, and I represent several as well, quite a bit more informal than a township board meeting like this. A lot of action gets done via email, back and forth. And so initially, the response from the board president was, no problem. No problem on the ducks, no problem, right? And so, okay, that's fine. And throughout this time period, now this is last summer, the Dykes are continually improving the ducks area. They're planting landscaping, they're planting grasses, they're doing all that. They did all of that before this process really started. And then all of a sudden, the issue of the ducks wasn't okay. The HOA kind of reversed course and said, oh, by the way, you can't have them, or we need to talk about them, or you need to keep them better, or whatever. And so the Dykes kind of started down that discussion with the HOA. All right.
And that was this spring of 2018.
Yes.
So prior to that, the year or so ahead of that, when you asked for a dock extension and said, by the way, we have ducks, no issues up until spring of 2018 that you're aware of.
Yes.
Okay.
And so obviously we're not privy to, I can't open the paper and see who filed a complaint with the township, right? So when those complaints are being filed, who's filing them, we don't know that. That seems to be going on behind the scenes. But now what we do know, because we have the benefit of the results of the Freedom of Information Act request, is that we were trying to continue this dialogue. All right, now you're saying the ducks aren't fine, or you want us to alter the containment system. Let's talk about it. And we didn't know what was driving that. So we didn't know neighbors were complaining to the HOA at this time. All we knew was the HOA all of a sudden cared when they didn't used to care. And so we said, fine, let's have meetings. When's the next meeting? When can we address this? We're very proactive about it. And you want to talk about crickets? It was crickets. There was no response. No opportunity was given to continue these discussions. Next thing we know, this process is started. And we didn't know why, and we didn't know how, and it was kind of confusing, and it was a little surprising, honestly, when we got the complaints and we saw it was actually the HOA itself who had initiated these proceedings, when we were trying to work with them and continue these improvements. So the Dykes have continued to try to improve. I think they'll continue to do that, make improvements. Any homeowner does, right? You fix everything, and then when you're done, you go back to the beginning and start fixing the stuff you already fixed. And I think that's what the Dykes have continued to do. But they were doing this and trying to take measures and be proactive before any of this happened. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any appeal?
I know. Need to get a response from the HOA also.
May I offer a follow-up comment? So Scott Morehouse will speak on behalf of the HOA. I think we agree on the duration of the timeline. The discussion did start roughly a year ago, August of last year. I think through that process, having the personal relationships and the close neighborhood that we have, there was a lot of discussions back and forth there. That our belief at the time was that these direct discussions, which were less formal, would lead to a resolution. That continued on for several months. One of the points that we brought up many times in there was ultimately there's a township issue that needs to take place here. This needs to be requested of the township. And that was a conversation we had many times repeatedly. One of the reasons that complaint was filed is the feedback we'd get would be small changes, but then not follow through on it, or promises of something and inconsistent continuation of that.
Was that feedback from the Dykes, or was that feedback from
That was
neighbors?
between us personally and the Dykes, yes. And so one of the reasons that we did choose to file with the township was the number of times we said, you've got to start with the township. The HOA does have the ability to set some rules, but ultimately this needs to be started at a township level of, is this going to be approved within the ordinance? And when that action was continually not taken through many conversations, we did choose to say, okay, we have to trigger this somehow, because ultimately it wasn't going to matter what we did. We're always going to be a second tier to what the township had. So I look at that and realize that maybe what we believed was a person-to-person interaction and something that was less formal was now where this has been driven, not the right approach. But that was our intention, was to work through this and to say, let's talk openly about this. We've discussed this many times. We did formally send that in recently because these discussions have not gone anywhere. So that is a timeline that's gone for a year. I think we agree on that. We have different thoughts on the discussion that took place in there, but I can say that many, many attempts were made to facilitate what we believe would be a workable solution. And I echo some of the comments. I haven't heard one person here say these should be taken away. There has been tremendous amount of support here for this, and that has been the desire of having the conversations in that manner of saying, if we can get this to where it's a typical neighborhood pet, everybody should have the ability to enjoy their home, their property, the pet of their choosing in a way that works for them. That should also come with it doesn't put a burden on somebody else. And that's the goal we've tried to work for. This has become quite an extensive process that is not the ideal way to handle it. But even for where we're at, I think everybody collectively in this room desires that we make an outcome that works here.
I think my question's been answered.
Okay. Thank you. We've got the timeline addressed.
Thank you very much.
Can I make a comment? Please. One of the things that we find out with the Board of Appeals, a lot of times people will come in here for a variance request and they'll say, none of the neighbors have come to complain, so you should grant the request. We realize on the Board of Appeals that neighbors are hesitant to complain even if they aren't for the variance request or if they're absolutely against it. And it seems to me that one of the roles of the Board of Appeals is to look at the ordinance and say, does it meet the standards, and not go completely by public opinion. What people say in the public comment period helps us determine what's going on and so. But to me, the timeline at this point is kind of irrelevant. We seem to have a pretty good grasp of what happened, but it seems like if we're going to allow the grant the variance for the ducks, then that's not going to happen without some type of restrictions being placed on the property. And can you please correct me if I'm wrong on that? Because it seems like we would want to have some guidelines to go by, and what the homeowner association submitted to the dike seems to be reasonable too. If the Board of Appeals would take a look at granting the variance for the ducks and incorporating those guidelines. And I don't want to speak for the whole board because we can take each one of those items separately if we'd like to, or the homeowners association and the dikes can work through that and come back to the township and say, this is agreeable to the both of us. Can you grant the variance for the ducks with these stipulations in place? Can you comment on that?
Sure. Let me comment on a couple of different things. First, your zoning ordinance requires that the Zoning Board of Appeals issue a decision within 120 days of an application unless the zoning board and the applicant agree to extend that time period. So in response to the comment about sending it back to the homeowners association and then having them come back again, I would just caution you to be aware of that time frame, the 120 days, if that is one of the directions that the zoning board is intending or considering going. With regard to conditions, the provision in the zoning ordinance that authorizes the keeping of chickens in this district, as you see, does have a laundry list of restrictions. Given that this application is being reviewed essentially as a variance of that provision, it would certainly be reasonable for the zoning board to look at those restrictions, look at the proposals by the homeowners association, look at generally applicable standards within your ordinance regarding fencing or other items, and then to put all of those together to determine whether, in the board's opinion, there is a reasonable accommodation. I would surmise that any reasonable accommodation is going to have some conditions attached to it, because ultimately the ZBA is being asked to determine what's reasonable, and in order to do that and to provide the guidance to the property owner and the public, I think those would have to be spelled out.
And I'm not saying they have to come to an agreement and bring it to us, but we can ask them for advice and for their opinions on the proposal that the homeowners association made. Is that correct? We can do that.
The applicants of their opinion of the homeowners association proposal?
Yeah, both parties, but it's up to us to make the decision how, which one of those, if we want to consider all of them or just part of them. We have the authority to do that and not necessarily go by what the homeowners association says or what dikes say, correct?
That's correct. The homeowners association has to make its own determination of what's reasonable. They may agree with the ZBA. If the ZBA were to grant it, they may agree, they may disagree, they may require something more restrictive, less restrictive. So certainly you can take into consideration their proposal and the dike's response to that proposal, if any. But ultimately, the homeowners association will have to make its own determination as well.
It seems that one of the issues that will arise is the fact that whatever the resolution is, if standards and conditions are applied on reasonable accommodation determination, that will need to be transferable to other properties essentially in the township, will it not? I mean, will the township board the zoning board be somewhat obligated to those conditions on a movable basis from property to property throughout the township?
No, I think that the courts have been pretty clear in the fact that applications or requests under the Fair Housing Act are very case specific. They're determined on a case-by-case basis. Based on something that may be reasonable to the ZBA on a half-acre lot may not be reasonable on a 0.3-acre lot, or something that may be reasonable on a 10-acre lot may not be reasonable on a half-acre lot. So this goes beyond just emotional support animals, but any request you would receive under the Fair Housing Act, you would have to look at the specific application, those property characteristics, and make an independent determination. So I think here, this particular decision would not be binding on future applicants in that regard because it would have to be determined on a case-by-case basis. But I think in response to one other thing you said about the enforceability of this going forward, I would recommend, for the sake of everyone interested in the outcome of this, that the Zoning Board of Appeals decision matter be reduced to writing, so that there are clear findings, conclusions, and if there were to be a grant with conditions, that those are clearly spelled out so that everyone has clear guidance going forward.
Would the enforceability move to code enforcement?
Yes.
One of the areas I've struggled with is the complaint keeps coming up, odor. It seems largely subjective. The dikes live in a lake, rains, there's seasonality, there's other animals. If a condition is odor, how do we know it's these ducks? And it just seems like that's something that's wholly unenforceable.
Well, odor and noise, those types of complaints we deal with not only in this township but other communities as well, and they can be tricky. But if we have to present an odor issue or a noise issue, then we usually will have a witness who observed it or multiple who will come to court and testify about what they observed, what they smelled, what they heard. If there's a dispute about whether the odor is coming from ducks or some other source, and it's a major issue, then there are experts, I'm sure, that could be called in to testify about that. So I think there are ways to address those types of concerns if need be. But generally speaking, if a condition of an approval for chickens, another animal involves keeping the property free from odor, just like a dog owner would be required under the International Property Maintenance Code, there are ways, in my opinion, to prove that there's an odor and what the source of it is.
But where I was going with is, how would one prove it's these specific ducks rather than ducks that are stopping by a lake?
Well, that's a good question. I think it would probably be reasonable to assume that the smell may be concentrated to the area where the ducks are residing or where they're being fed or near where the pool is with the stagnant water, if that becomes an issue. So it's just going to be based on the observations at the time the complaint is investigated.
Thank you.
Mr. Dyke, how do you propose to prevent the ducks from wandering off your property and onto the neighbors?
Well, One of the things that we can do to address that is we've been talking with the HOA about a different enclosure that they are locked in at night. Outside of that, when they come out of that enclosure into the grass area during the day, I've offered to put in a different gate system, one that is more sturdy, wouldn't be able to be moved unless you unlock it. So we could use mechanisms like that to address that. I'm open to other fencing options, but I'm very restricted on HOA would have to work with me on what we can do there.
If Dylan is out in the yard with the ducks, how do you propose to keep the ducks out of the neighbor's yard and in your own?
Absolutely. Anytime they come within a certain number of feet of the property line, we tell Dylan, go get your ducks. Generally, that's where the landscaping piece is to the west and the playscape to the east.
So we're to rely on parental management?
Yes.
Okay.
As you would a dog or any other. And we have security cameras constantly on the ducks.
How are the ducks kept warm during the winter months?
They're cold-blooded animals, so they stay in that little enclosure with a little bit of straw, and they're totally fine.
No heat lamps or any devices like
The only
that?
thing we got to do is their water bowl has to have a heated water bowl so it doesn't freeze, and that's it. Although Dylan worries about that.
How often is the pen cleaned and sanitized? New bedding, new pool water?
Every 2 weeks on the bedding. Pool water is every day. Yeah, he rakes it in between the 2 weeks of the bedding.
I don't recall, was there a concrete slab there?
There's a concrete slab leading up to it, but in their pen it is not. We have natural dirt, and then there's the bedding on top of that, so that any feces that is laid absorbs into the ground as it naturally would.
Okay. How do you
specifically didn't put concrete there.
How do you dispose of the waste, the bedding, the solid waste?
It goes in our yard waste container that's picked up every week. We literally pull out the mulch and put it in the yard waste container.
They don't pick that up in the winter, do they?
No, they do not. But I would probably be putting it in the trash.
Do you bag it, or is it just dumped in there?
Currently, in the yard waste container, we just dump it in there because it goes with the grass clippings and everything else. For the regular waste, I'd have to bag it because that would be a huge mess.
How do you secure the food so that it's inaccessible to rodents and other animals?
It's in the little gray house, hard-sided house, within their pen area, and that's where that food stays. The food is stored in our house. It's brought out to them every day by Dylan and put in that little house for the ducks. That's their little shelter. And if we do come to agreement with the HOA on a different enclosure, those enclosures are typically 2 or 3 feet off the ground, that would assist as well.
What commercial activities do you engage in with the ducks?
None.
None? Do you plan any?
I'm sorry?
Do you plan any commercial activities
No.
with the ducks? Do you plan to keep more than 2 ducks on the property?
No, sir.
This may seem silly, but it's part of the ordinance. Do you plan any outdoor slaughtering of ducks?
Absolutely not.
The current pen is larger than 80 square feet, is that correct?
It's about 10 by 10, so yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So it seems that this board is going to be able to accomplish this task best by breaking this down into the three core elements that we have to deal with. The first is the 7 standards that are required to be objectively met. The second is reasonable accommodation. And the final issue is any conditions in the event that a reasonable accommodation is granted. So I think from an order standpoint, we need to begin with the 7 standards. The staff report has indicated that standards 2, 5, and 6 were found to be objectively satisfied. The board is required to find that all 7 standards are satisfied, not just 3 or 4 or even 6. The staff report also advised that standards 1, 4, and 7 require board determination, and standard 3 was identified as unsatisfied. Now, we've also been advised that we can conclude that the objectives that have not, or the standards that have not been objectively satisfied can be satisfied by way of reasonable accommodation. So I think we can get as a board to a point of the 7 standards are satisfied, some by objective standard, some by reasonable accommodation. But I think we can get to all of the standards being satisfied, provided there's reasonable accommodation. So the next issue is, have the requirements for reasonable accommodation been satisfied? The documentation that was presented to us by the attorney for the applicant and by the township's attorney, as well as, relative to the Fair Housing Act, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the court decisions, all indicate that the criteria that have been set forth in law and in court decision to determine that reasonable accommodation be granted have in fact been met. And I think therefore the board is compelled by law to provide a reasonable accommodation in this matter. So I think that moves us to the point of conditions for reasonable accommodation. And I think those are the issues that this board really needs to address, unless there is someone that has a stringent objection to meeting the 7 standards and the reasonable accommodation status.
I agree with what you said, Tom.
Can I ask the attorney one question?
Certainly, yes.
I'm sorry, our attorney. You said that our decision should not in any way be as a result or along with the homeowners association, correct? We should be separate from the homeowners association.
You're not bound by anything that the homeowners association said would be acceptable or not acceptable.
Okay, we're not bound by their criteria
Correct.
either for an agreement with the Dykes.
That's correct.
Even though they initiated the complaint, correct?
That's
That's why I was asking for the timeline, because I was wanting to just be clear on how the complaint started. So I agree with Tom on what you stated. I just wanted to make sure as far as the criteria, I think the criteria is going to be based on what the zoning board feels the criteria should be with recommendations by the homeowners association.
That's correct. The homeowners association has its own set of rules to interpret and apply and to determine what it believes is a reasonable accommodation.
But it is okay for us to consider that in our decision. Okay.
Okay, it seems that if we're going to establish conditions, the logical starting place is Ordinance Section 3.4Q, which is the requirements for chickens. I think that's at least where we need to begin our determination. So let me find that. Manette, is that something that you can get on the board for us?
That was part of the staff review, wasn't it?
Yes, it is. It's on page 2 of 8.
Either way.
So the section 3.4 states that no more than 6 chickens may be kept on a parcel of land, and that chickens that crow and roosters shall not be permitted. I think that the Dykes have agreed that there's not going to be more than 2 ducks. Okay, so I think that's a standard that we could establish. And I don't know what can be done about ducks that quack. I think it's part of our kind of goes there. So I think there has to be functional considerations, though, to the neighborhood and the neighbors for the volume of activity. Now, I'm not that familiar with how loud it gets, but evidently that's an issue for consideration. So I think we'll put that one in the to be considered column here. Item 3 says the outdoor slaughtering of chickens is prohibited. I guess we've addressed that. There won't be any slaughtering of ducks. The chickens shall be provided with and kept within a completely enclosed covered coop, which is defined as an enclosure and or cage at all times. The coop shall not exceed 80 square feet in area or 8 feet in height, and the chickens shall not be allowed to roam the parcel or any other property. This seems to be a bit of a sticking point. I think the cage, it's my opinion in this matter that the cage, the coop should be completely enclosed. I think that's for the purpose of the protection of the animals as well as to prevent any escape by whatever method might occur. But it prevents other animals from getting in. That seems reasonable to me. I think 80 square feet seems to be a reasonable size. I think the ordinance seems to be reasonable in that area. I think an 8-foot height seems reasonable. Chickens shall not be allowed to roam the parcel or any other property. I think as long as there is some mechanism in place to control the ducks when they're out of the pen or the enclosure, I think that would satisfy the neighbors, and I think that would satisfy the township. I don't know what that mechanism is. Maybe it's a leash, maybe it's an electronic fence, but I think there has to be some mechanism to guarantee the neighbors that the ducks won't be in their yard. I understand dogs don't cooperate all the time, but I think we have to get as close to that conclusion or that standard as we can get. And I would welcome input from you on what you think that might involve.
I'm open to suggestions on how we do that. First thing that comes to my mind is some type of, fencing along the property line, but that's a whole other set of issues, I guess. Having a fence in the backyard, the HOA would have to agree to that because I believe their bylaws do not allow fences in the backyard. I also want to address the one...
Before you go on, you are amenable to fencing your yard?
Yes.
Okay. All right, very good. Go on.
The coop area, the only concern, I want to make sure we understand each other clearly on that. The coop is the enclosure. It's got a ceiling, it's got hard sides and whatever, and they're kept in there for the protection and other things that you had cited. Chickens can live in a coop all day long and are fine. Ducks need to dig in the grass, so I'm not sure how we address and accomplish that. That's why we have the little small fenced-in area outside the little green fenced-in area so that they can dig in the grass and then go in the coop when needed. Not that I expect anyone to be a duck expert.
Right.
So we would have to look at that somehow.
All right. We're starting from the premise of the existing ordinance concerning chickens.
Yes.
And the existing ordinance calls for an enclosed area.
Yes.
So, if I recall, the fencing around the hot tub side of the containment area was about 4 to 5 foot tall.
That is correct.
So it did not go, it was not enclosed.
Right. We would be removing that and putting in a coop enclosure, if you would, that typically sit 2 or 3 feet off the ground, as I had said. You can change out the bedding at normal height. That chicken wire would be removed.
And how would the coop be enclosed then?
Because you buy it, it's a little structure. It's a little.
So it's like a cage.
Yeah, but it's made out of siding and looks like a barn. Or, I mean, there's tons of different things that you can do with that. So it's made out of hard material with a ceiling. And Scott and I from the HOA talked about this, of doing something like that. We would like to see that as well. But I need to make sure they give me approval for that, because it's almost like a shed, but not to that size. It'd be limited in size.
Okay. All right, so I'm coming back to, again, 80 square feet enclosed and 8 feet in height as a restriction. Okay.
Can I make a suggestion, Tom? Sure. One of the things that we found out with the Planning Commission is after 9:30 and especially after 10, we tend to not be as detailed as we should be with some of the decisions. And I guess I'd be in favor of postponing this and let the Dykes and the Homeowners Association work with some of this stuff, because we can talk about this with the Dykes, and that's fine, but it sounds like even if we come up to a resolution, they might still have a little bit of issue with the Homeowners Association. And if they can work together before our next meeting, it's possible that we could have something that we all agree with at that meeting, and we can do it when we're all fresh to discuss it and then come as a resolution. Because I think, like I said, for the most part, we agree that the ducks can stay. We agree that we can reasonably meet the 7 standards. We agree that we can have reasonable accommodations, but it's just some of these conditions of approval that are going to take some time, and I can't see us doing it accurately and getting it done within a reasonable amount of time yet tonight.
Right. I would agree with Greg on the basis that we're applying chicken ordinance to ducks, and they are different animals, so maybe we should have a little more informed opinion of what a duck needs before we start to throw conditions out that we're going to try to agree on tonight.
Okay, very good. All right, we'll entertain a motion to postpone variance request 1804 until the next scheduled meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second? I'll second. Is there any discussion? It's been moved and seconded that the board table or postpone variance request 1804 until the next scheduled meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion's carried. Since there is no other business before the board, is there a motion to adjourn? Anybody?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? I'll second. Is there any discussion? It's been moved and seconded that the board adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you.